This episode of Fire Engineering Podcast is sponsored by LogRX, providing real-time accountability of all your narcotics from cradle to grave. Coming soon, LogRX will also track medical supplies, equipment, PPE, and even vehicle checks. Learn a better way to track your narcotics at logrx.com. That's LOGRX.com.
Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tencatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by enforced technology. Only from TenCate Protective Fabrics.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Fire Engineering's Tactical Impact. I'm your host, Jim Silvernail, my co-host, Chief Jason Hoevelman. This is the show all about tactics, and that's what we're going to bring for you today. But before we introduce our guest, we're gonna talk about a topic that's really big in the fire service right now, and it's really hitting all the airwaves, and we want to bring it to you with our perspective. Right now, the U.S. Department of Labor has come out with a statement that emergency response workers in America face considerable occupational health and safety hazards in dynamic and unpredictable work environments, which we knew. However, they've come to the conclusion that the current OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety Admin, emergency response preparedness standards are out of date and incomplete. They feel that the address the full range of hazards facing emergency responders, lag behind changes in productive equipment, performance, and industry practices, conflict with industry consequence standards, and are not aligned with many current emergency response guidelines provided by other federal agencies. So what they proposed is a change, and this change is they're going to try to remove their initial OSHA standard on fire brigades, standard 29 CFR 1910.156, and replace it with an all-encompassing emergency response standard. This standard is going to have a lot of implications as far as our tactical deliveries. It has a lot of mandates in it. And we really want to focus on one of those mandates, or possible mandates. As you know, or some of you might not have known, the call for public comments ended just a few days ago, July 21st. And Jason and I really tried to get you out there and make your public comments and get your voice heard, because it does have a lot to do with the American Fire Service. So we want you out there, and really we all should be having a voice. But really, one of those main topics has to deal with our guest today. He co-authored an article about this subject matter, and we're going to get into that article. But before I go on, Jason, I'd like you to add your comments about what we're about to talk about today.
Yeah, it's been a topic, really, this started pretty early in the year. It just kind of got legs later in the spring, because I think the original deadline for public comment was in May. And so when that deadline started to get close, this topic got a lot of attention, as it should have, that was able to get the public comment period extended, like you said, to earlier this week. But the overreaching problems or challenges that are going to be faced in this new document are very broad for the fire service in general, but it does specifically create problems as to exactly what our mission is. And, I'm sure we'll dig into this, but it seems like, although maybe well-intended, not all factors that are involved in making these kinds of decisions on the fire ground, I don't feel we're taken into consideration when you consider the studies that have been available to us over the last 10 years that indicate where the dangers really exist on the fire ground. It doesn't run parallel to with what this document is asking us to do. So I think we've got a great guest on here that can help explain some of that, and that the people that watch and listen to this can be well informed. and can go back to their agencies and look at what they can do or how they're going to be impacted.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest, Sean Duffy. Sean, welcome. Sean is a fellow FDIC instructor and has a lot of material out there that people should be reading. So I'm not going to try to scoop your bio, Sean. I'm going to let you talk about yourself. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, first, appreciate the invite to come on the show. It's always good to sit and talk with people who share the same vision. About me, it's pretty simple. I've been in the fire service 19 years. I've worked for a couple different agencies throughout that 19 years, all operated in their own very unique ways. So for me, having that perspective kind of drives a lot of my viewpoints on how things should, or how I think things could be better, to put it politely. So, uh, you know, other than that, I just try and share my failures more than anything else. And like most of us, I think we've all failed pretty often enough to be able to have those standpoints. And I think it's important that we share that so that we can kind of combat that and move forward in the fire service and bring us into a place of true growth.
Well, thank you for being on. And we want to talk about this thing today, this article that you co-authored with a couple very notable people here that's on this list. Bill Carey, yourself, Nick Ledeen, Chris Thompson, and Scott Thompson. But kind of fill us in. Start from the beginning. What gave you the idea, and how did you guys all get together?
So me and Nick were kind of just shooting the idea back and forth for a little bit, and we weren't really sure how this was going to go. But again, much like anything in the fire service, frustration kind of stemmed a lot of it. So we were just talking, and I'm like, I feel like we have more conclusive evidence now than we ever have to really kind of revisit this experiment that we've been doing for the past 27 years. And he agreed, and we decided the best approach would be to get a team of people together and kind of hit this from all different angles, and kind of dice this up, and we each take our own little lane and come together and make something that wasn't emotion based, right, but was factual. And we could say, hey, like, obviously you're passionate about a certain thing, like you're going to have some emotion attached to it, but if we really want to truly change things and drive this in a different direction, we've got to have some common ground, right? And we've got to come and think things like logically. So we started to write the paper. It took us about 2 years to complete from start to finish. Put it out there. A lot of people read it before we published it. We wanted to make sure it was, something that would resonate with the fire service. And for the most part, it's been pretty good. Just like anything, you're going to have some pushback, but I think most firefighters today are in that mindset of like, we have to do better, and what is best for our civilians, and data tells the truth, right? So having that was instrumental, and we just felt that it was time to put it out there.
Well, I think that I know that I've read it. I know Jason's read it, and I think it was very well put together, and it answers, it uses data to answer a lot of the questions, which in the fire service we haven't been the best at, but we're getting really good at it. But a couple things that really hit me were your use of the rescue survey and Project Mayday, and I think those were two instrumental factors in making your argument.
Yeah, we when it comes to the Project Mayday and firefighter rescue survey, a lot of people, they're like, it's not peer reviewed, and I would make the argument that, well, just about any of the data that we get isn't really peer reviewed if you want to get out to it, like NIFRS data and stuff like that. So all we can do is take what we have, right, and really try and make the best of it. And although like firefighter rescue survey is voluntary, like currently right now we have almost 4,300 submissions, since 2016. So could we do better? Yeah, absolutely. But for argument's sake, like that's what we have to go on. These are actual fireground rescues, right? It's validated by a team. So there's no way that people are going to put false information in there. That's going to get caught and filtered out immediately. And it has, that has been caught a couple times for people trying to test the system, so to speak. So I think that both the Project Mayday and Firefighter Rescue Survey are extremely valuable. And it's from actual fireground incident or instance. I don't think that like we could do much better than having a study on actual incidents that have occurred.
I think the thing, Sean, when you get the pushback, and I've heard the same thing about, it's not a scientific, it doesn't follow the research protocols for scientifically peer-reviewed projects and papers. However, I've not heard anybody offer an alternative solution to what's being done that's going to be better. Well, frankly, there's not been any alternative solutions that I've heard or been proposed with when it's been a point of discussion. And to a degree, when you look at the micro level of what that survey is doing, it is peer reviewed because it's being done by industry professionals, both from the academic side and the fireground or practitioner side of things. So we are a little bit late as a profession to the data and analysis game, but I don't see where there's anything better right now that's going to measure those things.
Yeah, I would agree. And, like we welcome conversation and debate. I think that's healthy. Some of the arguments that have come through have been like, oh, you guys are anti-staffing, you're trying to reduce, and that's not it at all. If anything, we're on that same train of like pushing firefighter safety and doing stuff. And when we have the information to show it and say, hey, look, really what we need to make an argument is if we all had proper staffing levels, then maybe this conversation wouldn't even exist, right? And what we show is the faster we get to work, the faster we could put 4 people working simultaneously instead of 2 taking on the brunt of that load, the safer it is for us, the safer it is for our civilians. And I think it's time that we take an honest look at that and we stop trying to skirt around the issue.
I agree. Let's get into this 2 and 2 thing. All right. Let's kind of define it a little bit and let's talk a little bit about possibly the pros and cons so we can see both angles of this thing and really see how it affects us on a realistic tactical implementation. So anybody want to take a stab at the actual defining this 2 and 2 thing, and where do you actually find it? Because it's this myth, right? It's a myth in the fire service of where is it found? We all know it comes from NFPA or it's in NFPA, but where and what does it exactly say?
So I would say for me, I always look like at the two in, 2 out as coming in like we got NIST studies that we did the staffing study on that. Obviously, you have NFPA recommendations of what should be on each rig. And then, if you just look at the standard, the respiratory protection standard that OSHA has, none of them, or I shouldn't say none of them, that really doesn't align with what we're trying to do, right? Like it's literally saying like, let's slow the fireground down and wait, so when I look at that, I look at, hey, we have something that's trying to be put in standard. We also already have other things that have been studied and put into place. I just want to know like why we're not following through with that. Like as far as me as a firefighter in 19 years, OSHA's 2 and 2 out has always been a thing. That's just what I was brought up with. And then I found the NIST study and the NFPA where it's like, hey, we should have 4 on an engine and 5 on a ladder truck. Like these are not uncommon things. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but for me, like knowing that these things are in play and then picking and choosing where we implement them, I think is causing a lot of confusion.
I think in a simplistic form, if you have 2 people going inside of a structure for a fire attack, they want 2 outside, which could either be your engineer who's not in gear or your, and your command officer. But I think, what is that? I think you have to ask yourself, what is that doing? What is that achieving? And I think that's where you guys really started asking some questions and started looking at some of this data and analyzing and saying, well, are we truly being effective, or are we hurting ourselves in that delivery? Or even if we arrive, with 3 people on an apparatus, does that mean that we can't go inside of a burning structure? And I think that, we have that all the time where I work. Jason, you have it too at times where, you're pulling up, but that your second dude could be 5 minutes behind you, what have you. But does that mean you're not going inside of a structure? And I think that really goes back to our objectives, which you guys brought up. But I do like some of the resources that you used from the actual rescue survey. And one of them was the time to survival. What are you exactly doing when you're waiting to go inside to get somebody who could be trapped? When we go to structures, you always, well, 90% of the time there's nobody in there. And what does that do? It forms that complacency where it's like all we think about is extinguishment or, controlling the fire. And it's like, well, that's not our main goal. Our main goal here is rescue. We can never lose sight of that. It should be on your mind 100% of the time. Just because 90% of the time it doesn't happen, it should. So one of the stats I really liked that you guys use was, looking at the time to survival percentages at this graph. I think this made a lot of sense. If you're waiting a couple minutes, where does your survivability graph start? It starts falling dramatically.
Yeah, it does. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go for it. I want to hear your explanation on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is like we have to cultivate a bias for action. That's why we're there, right? Like nobody else is going to handle this except for us. The second thing is like, although searches are objective, we might have to understand that, hey, the faster we can actually put a line in place to get the search underway, the better it is. When you start tasking 2 people with multiple tasks, right? Like you're saying, hey, do fire attack and search. One of those things is not getting done properly, right? Second, you're really exhausting like your crew. So like having a situation like this, like obviously you see the longer we wait, the worse the fire gets, which means what? The structure's continuing to weaken. The worse our victims are because smoke kills more people than fire does, right? So there's a lot of things that take into action or come into action when like we're talking about tactical priorities. And I think when we have time versus survival percentages like these, it kind of puts it in perspective that like they don't have much time, right? Like there's a few things we can't help. We can't help our dispatch, like how long it's taken them for them to alert us. We can't really help response times. But what we can do is help what we are in control of, which is getting out the door quick, masking up quick, throwing ladders, stretching line, like all of these things. But ultimately, even if you fight a fire from outside, the problem is still on the inside, right? Like we have to address that. And the longer we wait to do that, the worse it is for everybody. So a graph like this, I don't think it takes a surgeon to really look at it and realize like, oh yeah, like making somebody wait when we have the ability to do something now is not of benefit to anybody. And from a legal standpoint, like I would be curious to see what a lawyer would take of this data, finding out that we didn't do what we said we were going to do,
And you bring up a good point about time. And we've been fortunate with UL and NIST and other studies in the last decade and a half in particular. And the one thing when it comes to 2 in, 2 out, not only survival percentage, but a big part of those studies is to understand when environments become hostile fire environments and preventing that and eliminating heat and energy. And I've always asked the question, I've never got a satisfactory answer is, I'm all for safety and I'm all for having, people on the exterior when you can get them. But, our problem, like you said, working error. Are we overtasking those initial companies, try to do more with less instead of focusing on one problem and eliminating that clock factor? But the best way to eliminate a hostile fire event is to get water on the fire and cool that environment as quickly as possible. And it doesn't matter if you've got 2 or 8 people on the outside. If you have 2 operating on the inside, and you can't commit and get to the seat of the fire fast enough. You've waited, you've been indecisive, you've allowed that fire to grow, you've allowed that environment to get hotter and collect more energy. It doesn't matter how many people are on the outside. You're not going to stop that hostile fire event. And I think that's an argument that doesn't get presented enough. And I've never had anybody give me a satisfactory answer of what those two people or whatever number on the outside are going to prevent that. Is it, and I present, okay, if I've got 4, I'd almost rather have all 4 on that first attack line, moving it as quickly as possible, having more eyes on the interior environment and getting that fire knocked down in maybe half the time that prevents the hostile environment than the slower team. And I just wonder what kind of conversations you had with this data as part of that.
So we've had some pretty interesting conversations. Obviously, there's those that say, well, put the fire out, everything gets better. And I'm like, that's great. But if all you're doing is standing outside, you're not really putting the fire out, right? Like you're just kind of keeping it at bay. Then you've had, oh, well, fire attack is more important, search will come second. Again, I made the argument of that's fine. So we're putting the fire out, and the whole time the victims are still inside. So even if the threat's eliminated, we have still failed to remove people inside, which means that exposure, duration, and dose are a huge factor, right? So the longer they're in there, obviously their survival percentage is going to continue to decrease. So the argument, like you said, if I've got 4 people readily available, I could get that line in place quick. I can split it. I can say, you 2 search, you 2 are fire attack. There's like a multitude of things. But most importantly, I now have more hands to do what? Ventilate the structure, right? So fire attack is doing their thing. As we're moving through spaces, we're able to isolate and ventilate. We're starting to clear that out. So all of these things are happening at such a good speed, rather than keeping 2 outside. And just to back it up for a second, like you were alluding to with, hey, this driver's not in gear. Okay, so those 2 people outside could be a driver or the incident commander. If something was to happen to those 2 inside, are they ready to go right now? Right? Are they packed out, ready to go? Are they going to really make that rescue? What the data shows is no, right? So when we start having these conversations of what is best utilization of our crew size, because we can't really do anything about the staffing level we have. We just got to work with it, right? So how about we train to operate effectively? How about we worry about the fire that we have instead of an agency telling us what we should do long before this fire happens? And we understand what our mission is. Firefighter safety is a real thing. I'm not going to say that it's not important, but we cannot place ourselves above those we swore to protect. That goes against everything we stand for. So, when you say, hey, how can maybe I accomplish both of these? In some areas where you have your next arriving engine or ladder or whoever that might be within 3 minutes or 4 minutes, that 3 to 4 minute delay to me is justifiable to start getting in and get stuff done, right? They'll be there soon. And when you start looking at the Mayday data, these Maydays are not occurring within that first 10-minute time frame that a lot of us were told they are. They're 20, 25, 30 minutes into an incident, right? So RIT teams are needed. They are important, but let's focus on the problem we currently have, and then we can address it from there, and then you bring in who's rescuing who, and you start looking at interior crews. Maybe you self-rescue another, maybe a person from your own crew. Those are where most of your Maydays are being mitigated. So again, that only proves that by occupying the structure as quickly as possible with as many people as possible, we're going to be in a better position.
As a fire chief, and I know Jason feels the same way, our goal, we have objectives, to save lives, protect property, and also to keep our people safe. And you might say, well, if you're not listening to this, you're not being safe. But my view is exactly what you're saying, is that, if you put the fire out, people aren't jumping out of windows. And you're also getting in quickly to knock down and to save those people. So you are achieving your objectives that we have sworn an oath to. I always go back to the mantra: no other action on the fireground saves more lives and property than the properly timed, properly placed, properly sized attack line. Well, the proper time is now. It's ASAP. You should really never delay that attack unless you absolutely have to. There are some situations, that would come into play, but waiting, for the 2 and 2 out for an artificial barrier, I get it. It's for safety, but I don't know if it's achieving the safety that we can achieve by hitting fire. And it's exactly what you're saying. And I'm going to get into Project Mayday here in a second before we polish off the rescue survey. But I think there's some stats there that also show the reasoning why we shouldn't keep people in reserve, and also the all argument of where should RIC come in. It's important to distinguish between IRIC and RIC. The 2 and 2 out. Really make that IRIC happen. And then you get into the RIC, which is the actual, the fast team or the actual RIC team. But, what we're talking about today is the IRIC. I think those people need to be inside. And before we move on to that discussion, let's I do have one more picture here to go through. And that is, the rival or the crew that located the victim. It's overwhelming who's doing the rescues, is it not? Or locating the victim. And why am I delaying that? You have to ask yourself, why? If it's in the name of absolute safety, then give me an argument. But if it's not, let's talk this out. And that's exactly what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's advocating to be reckless here. Like, we're not saying send one person in by themselves. We're not saying, hey, this structure is well involved, like get after it. Like that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is if conditions allow us to act, we need to act, period. Right. And often, if anyone who follows firefighter rescue survey, they can see like at what point in this fire are these rescues happening. It breaks it all the way down for you. So I won't get too far into that. I just want to throw that out there that, like, hey, arrival order matters, right? It's not surprising that the first in is finding 63%. It's not surprising at all because they're going in and people are trying to come out, right? So getting that line in place and doing all of that, like, or maybe like they're in rescue mode because they have reports or they can see a victim, whatever that is, they're there now, right? So, as you can see, the second due is responsible for 24%. What would this look like if the first due couldn't go in because they're waiting, and then the second due came in, and now, right, they're able to make a full crew to go in and do their things? These numbers would be a lot lower, right? Because talking to people, most people say, yeah, I know 2 and 2 out is a thing, but we don't follow it anyway. So realistically, like if you're trying to put something in a place that people are like not following, is that safe? Right? And that's my question is, you've created a policy that people are trying to sidestep around because they know what our mission is, and this is counterproductive to that. Are you making people not as situationally aware as they should be in an effort to kind of like do the things that we're supposed to be doing? I don't know if that makes sense to some people, but that's kind of the whole thing is like firefighters are creative, right? Like we'll find a way to get around anything. So why don't we just make a policy that makes sense, have it be dynamic, and give us the tools to navigate the way we're supposed to, and then we won't have to worry about it. People won't be, maybe we'll have a higher percentage of survival rates.
Response times matter, not because we want to go be observers. It's because it's well known for decades, the quicker we get there, the faster we can take action, the better things are going to get. And this is somewhat adverse to that, obviously.
2 points. 1 point, I do like your fact of the second due as well. If you're looking at this graph, you see, the first due locates the victim, but that's just location. How are you getting that person out of there? Everyone's so idealistic. Oh, I found the person, I'm getting them out. 200-pound people are not easy just to pull out of a structure that has a ton of furnishings or hoarding factors. It takes a lot of effort to get them out. The last point I really want to talk about before we move on to the Project Mayday, and that is, you said it right. People try to skirt, around the legality of it. There is an allowance to violate two in and two out when you have a known rescue. We know that it's actually spelled out really well, and people think, well, I can use that every time. That's not how it's written. It's actually written that you have to have a known rescue, and it's confirmed that there's a rescue for you to violate, and then you have to go write a letter to your chief that you violated, which is crazy. But once
It's
again,
absolutely.
what do we always tell our firefighters on situational awareness? It's not unoccupied until we say it's unoccupied. So that little verbiage alone, I think, violates a lot of what we do in the fire service.
It does, and I want to make sure that I have these numbers correct because going on your point, it's worth putting out there. Currently, right now in the standard, there's a lot of leeway, right? If you look and you read it, they give us some leeway to go through, and I have those slides in my presentation. I'm more than happy to share it with you guys after this, so that you guys can share them too. But moral of the story is if this new emergency response standard goes into effect and they decide that, hey, we are going to change what this two and two out looks like you just said, it's either known victim or reports of victim. Like I'm going to either see them or somebody's got to report it to me. That doesn't do us justice. And then obviously, oh, now I got to write a letter. What does that do immediately? You're putting firefighters and decision makers in a position where they're afraid to get in trouble if they do the wrong thing. And that in itself could lead to worse outcomes. So using the firefighter rescue survey data that we have, here's what it says. 3% were reported to be all out of the structure. 29% of our rescues had no reports at all. 67% had reports of victims, and 80% of victims' reports were correct. What does that mean? To me, what that means is reports or no reports, nothing's going to change for us because I can't rely that all of my reports are accurate, nor can I rely that the fact that just because I physically don't see somebody or they're not being reported to be in there means that that structure is empty, right? So we have to just assume that it is, right? Especially in today's day and age where people are working from home and like families have moved in with each other because of inflation and all these other crazy things. Like we have all reasonable belief to think that any time of the day, somebody's probably in that structure, whether we see a vehicle in the driveway or not, whether, the neighbors say they're here or not, like you just don't know. So if conditions allow for us to make the interior, like that's what we need to be doing.
Those are great points. I mean, the old adage, remember when you were in rookie school and they're like, okay, do a size up. What time of day is it? Well, you know how much that's changed in the last 4 years? People are at home all the time because of this work at home that was created through COVID, the remote, working, etc. There's people at home all the time. You're absolutely right. So let's change gears a little bit. We talked a lot about the rescue survey, and we could sit here for a long, long time, but we have limited time today. But with the rescue survey, we showed why we can't delay fire attack because of our objectives of saving lives and also our safety of putting the fire out. But let's go into this Mayday project, shall we? So let's talk about. So this is really, what are we really trying to achieve with keeping two people out? Are they an IRIC? Can they effectively get people out? But let's look at some data. Let's look at some of the data that you guys used. And I want to bring this factor up. This always does it for me. There was a study out from the FDNY over 20 years in New York of who made the rescues, and it was pretty similar to this of the Mayday, of who found the Mayday, who pulled the Mayday out. And I think this is, and you might ask yourself, well, what does that have to do with two and two out? But I'm going to let you talk about it, Sean. I've talked enough.
Yeah, no, oh, I'm long-winded, so I'll try and keep this short. Pretty much what this means in the realm of two and two out is that if you look at self-rescue, members of the victim's crew or another interior crew, that comes out to be about 88, 89%. So out of these 12,277, we could say that 88 to 89% of the time, should something happen, it's going to be mitigated with the crews that are already inside. Why does that matter? It matters because putting them first is safer for us. That's what this data shows, right? If we have a victim first mindset and we start saying, hey, we know that we can accomplish more things with more people. We know the fire's going to go out faster if we could get that line in there. We know that searches are going to get done, like all this stuff. Then really the argument to be made is if I only put 2 people in, who's coming to get me? That's going to be down here by the RIT, right? Those 2 people out. That's 7.9% of the time. And I'm not saying that RIT's not needed. I'm just saying that 7.9% of the time, that is a true RIT activation. Everything else has failed. So let's reduce that crew size. I only put 2 in. If I can't self-rescue, or the person that can't rescue me, or person that's in there with me can't rescue me, where does that leave us, right? How about this thought process? There's only 2 of us inside. We're actively fighting a fire. We got 2 outside. I go through a floor or something like that. Now, instead of me putting down a hose line to go help my partner, I can't. I've got to keep suppressing this fire, right? I've got to be disciplined, which means there is now a time delay between the Mayday activation for those 2 people outside to physically come in and do that. Right. So there's a lot of things that I think that people aren't taking into consideration with this theory. While although it sounds great, in reality, functionality, it doesn't make any sense. What makes more sense is more people, putting them in there and putting them in a position that should something happen, we can still take care of the threat and we can also make that rescue.
Yeah, we've had the argument, and this is just transitioning a little bit from IRIC to RIC, but we've had the argument of who should be the RIT team, right? And when you have limited staffing to begin with or limited resources, where do you take a team and put them on the sideline, right? Who do you bench? And you put them in, whether you call it on the deck or what have you. I truly think that this data and the next slide I'm going to show you really put it in perspective in that. So we make our RIT team, in our SOG, our RIT team is the last arrival. It's not too uncommon for many. A lot do that. And they might say, well, aren't you unsafe? You just said that, you keep your people safe. Isn't that for them? Well, if you think about everything else that goes on a fireground, it's not just about putting the fire out. It's about keeping, the building safe, softening the building, doing truck company operations. It's also about searching for victims and doing our objectives. But I think this slide puts not only the IRIC, but the RIC in perspective as far as what are we truly trying to achieve. Jason, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have a similar practice, and it's all about, again, it's time. And the more companies that we can put into the appropriate task and tactical related positions, the safer that building's going to be. From a command perspective, when we talk about command, if you only get 2 officers, the first officer's IC, and a lot of people will say, well, the second officer's safety. And I've always not completely agreed with that, because I want somebody on the blind side of the building, because it's safer to have 4 sides seen by 2 people than one person scrambling, always doing laps and missing something. And I think the same thing goes for our SOGs that we follow, that puts RIT at the back end of that. And that's not saying that there aren't crews that would be available as they progress and arrive, but again, it's time. And the quicker we can throw resources, appropriate resources, and put them in the right places with the right equipment and right tasks, the safer that building is going to be, the safer those operations are going to be, and will greatly reduce the probability and need for a RIT team. And so that's kind of the mentality that we follow.
Yeah, and just real quick for those stat nerds like myself, 16% of people that had a Mayday had no faith in their RIT team that was coming to get them, right? However, 83% had faith in their company officers and 82% had faith in their incident commanders. So what does that tell you? Are we just checking a box and putting 2 people in play? Who are those 2 people? Are those 2 brand new firefighters? Are those two people that we work with on mutual aid that we've never even seen before? There's a lot of factors that come into a successful RIT operation. So the people I know I could trust the most are probably the people right there beside me, right? And that's worth noting, I think.
I think reality too, Sean, and you both know this, is that if we were really going to assign a RIT company for a true downed firefighter or company, it would be a full second alarm assignment.
Absolutely.
Not two people.
Right. So
I mean,
Yeah, true.
Yeah. By that definition, right? Not to cut it off, but by that definition, if that's the case, like, is anybody making an argument that every structure fire should be 2 alarms then, if that's what we're worried about?
Right.
You know? So
yeah,
that's a good argument.
Because we've learned a lot about real Maydays that were RIT heavy. It's a lot of damn people for one person.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost criminal when people look at this and they say the 2 in and 2 out, or the RIT, is the safety lever behind, or the safety net behind my operation. When really there's so many pieces to the safety net that we forget, but we take away from it because of this 2 in 2 out, or the IRIC, the RIC. Getting lines in place quickly, having backup lines, having truck company operations to get in, soften the structure, all the things that we need, identifying the flow path. These are things that are as much part of the safety profile as that RIC or IRIC. And also, you ask, in a class, I'll ask, okay, who has a RIT team on every fire? Every hand goes up. And then you ask, who has an ALS or an advanced life support unit ready to go? About half the hands go up. They're starting to more go up now. And then you realize what kills us faster? Collapse. And you're 100% right. I'm not trying to diminish the need for RIT. We need them every fire, right? But it's one component, and that one component can't overshadow, the whole big scenario.
Absolutely.
Let's add this one more up here to kind of go with the point here. And a Mayday elapsed time when, or a time elapsed when the Mayday occurred. So, and tell us why this is important, Sean.
So, for me, it's important. Again, maybe others were told differently in their career, but I was always taught from very early on, like, hey, like, Maydays are going to happen immediately, especially with new like building construction coming out. Like, this fire's been burning before we've gotten there, so we have to be cautious, right? So it was a little bit of a scare tactic. And as I started researching this and I looked at it, I'm like, oh man, like 10 to 15 minutes. Generally, in most places, you have a good amount of people there. If not, let's go to 15 to 20 minutes. I think that's a good time frame to look at. That's 13.1%. But as you look down, 20 to 25, 25 to 30, 30 to 35, those are our largest areas, with our largest being between 20 and 25 minutes at 19.1%. So what that told me anyway was, why? Are we comfortable at this point? Are we kind of letting our situational awareness down because we feel like we've got this thing in the bag, like we're good to go? Like, maybe it's fatigue. Well, there's a multitude of reasons that could possibly be, but for the sake of argument, I think we need to look at that and say, if majority of my Maydays are going to happen between 20 and 35 minutes, when are the majority of my rescues happening, right? When are the majority of am I getting water on the fire, whether that be exterior and then move interior or straight interior? Like, those are the benchmarks we have to focus on. I would hope that 20 to 25 minutes or even 30 minutes into a fire, either A, the fire's out, or we realize like this is a defensive fire and there's not much we're doing, right? So what that led me to believe is that probably better training for firefighters should take place instead of risk-averse policies that really kind of handcuff us in doing what we're doing, and then sometimes could actually make it more dangerous for us to do a task.
I think those are phenomenal points. I couldn't agree more with that scenario, or your analysis of that time. Sometimes we lose focus, even in the command car. I know that people believe that once these horns cross that you become all-knowing, but it's easy to get that blind side, and that those are great. I know you said this all the time. I'm a data nerd, but guess what? We need that data to prove what we're doing and to keep us focused and not complacent. And I think That's a great point.
Yeah, it's everyone's got opinions, right? And that's fine. But in the fire service, we really need to be operating off of known truths, the facts. Like that's really where we need to be at. And I think that's the fight, right? Shifting from the, hey, I get it. You might have been told this. You might have an opinion, but let's have a conversation of what we can prove and what we know, because that's really what's going to make the difference.
Yeah, I think the argument when people see this, anytime that someone goes against a standard, they're thinking, oh, there goes the chivalrous firefighter just wanting to burn a helmet and go, be salty. And that is absolutely the opposite of what's occurring here. What's occurring here is that we're looking at the facts, the data, and saying, you know what, there's a safer way to do this that also achieves our objective. And I think that's really, because I know that as a fire chief, I have objectives like Jason. We can both tell you this, and that, our firefighter safety is always, always on my mind, always. But I also know that I can never fully take the risk out of putting somebody in a burning structure. You can't. But that doesn't mean that that's not going to happen. We're going to do it. We're going to do it professionally, and we're going to train, and we're going to have the right, standard operating guidelines to make that happen. But I really, like I said, I really believe in what you guys wrote, Jason.
Yeah, I think that, as it relates to the document, again, you're going to always have some of these agencies trying to implement regulations. And a lot of times it's well-intended and they're trying to keep people safe. But I think that there's some blind spots that they've not been able to, they either don't look at it or they've not paid enough attention to this, and dare I say, this blanket policy that really doesn't meet what it's trying to accomplish along with the mission of the fire service. And I would just challenge chiefs as we talk about firefighter safety. And I know Jim will agree with this, and a lot of others that are watching this, is that the best way to keep your members safe is through training and drilling, and to not make excuses for not investing in that, and for not having programs and not having ways to ensure that they're ready for the fireground and that they understand this data. They understand the firefighter rescue survey. They understand Project Mayday. They understand why we have this hose load, why you have that hose load, why we carry this length of ladder on this piece of equipment. And the most effective safety tool we have is training and drilling and education. And as chiefs, you have to invest in that.
Sean, it's been a pleasure having you here, and we thank you for what you do. Do you have any concluding thoughts or message that you want to send out?
I would just say, dive in, research things for yourself, find out what truth is to you. Don't just blindly believe things, whether it be what I say or somebody else says. Question. It's okay to question things, as long as it's done in a manner that's tactful and respectful. But if you're gonna question things, make sure that you've researched things and you can come to the table with facts. Otherwise, there's really no conversation that happens, right? Like, this is about information exchange, not who's right and who's wrong.
Sean, if the people that watch and listen to this want to get a hold of you, are you going to be anywhere coming up? And what's the best way for them to reach out to you if they have additional questions?
Yeah. So I'm everywhere all the time. So best way to reach out to me is personal email, duffy558@gmail.com. Shoot me a Facebook message, whatever it is that you need to do. As far as some things coming up, I got a searchable versus survivable class here in Michigan coming up in August, and then I'll be up your way actually in September for the River City Rescue Conference. So I'll be doing that, and just keep plugging away a little bit at a time,
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Before we go, Jason and I always want to send out the message of continually write your experiences down, send them to fire engineering so we can publish them. Also, I know that FDIC closed. You should, the evaluations, well, we've done the evaluations. and they should be coming out within a couple of weeks, I would think. But I don't know the facts on that, but they will be coming out shortly. So good luck to all of you who have submitted. And even though you might not get that approval letter, keep submitting. It'll happen. It'll happen for you. A lot of us have those stories where we got turned down. So please submit. I know Jason and I are headed to New Jersey here at the beginning of the next week. And if you have any suggestions for FDIC or have any ideas, please get them to us, and we will voice them for you. But for myself, Jim Silvernail, and for Jason Hoevelman, we thank Sean Duffy for being here, and thank you for tuning in to Tactical Impact.
This episode of Fire Engineering Podcast is sponsored by LogRX, providing real-time accountability of all your narcotics from cradle to grave. Coming soon, LogRX will also track medical supplies, equipment, PPE, and even vehicle checks. Learn a better way to track your narcotics at logrx.com. That's LOGRX.com.
Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tencatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by enforced technology. Only from TenCate Protective Fabrics.